Alrighty then. So yes, we are live. I'm here with my new friend Kyle. How are you doing, Kyle?
I'm doing great, David. Thank you. And you go by David, right?
Yeah, David.
Okay.
I prefer David, but either
Okay,
way,
great.
if you call me Dave, I won't be angry.
No,
It's
no
all
worries.
good.
Yeah.
It's all good. So
Well, it's
I
great to be here.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, someone recommended that I invite you on, and as always, I don't research my guests because I want to discover them. But before going live, you said you worked for Church Militant, so I'm thinking, oh, now I'm talking to another big fish here. But
No,
before we get
no.
into what you're doing today, before we get into all that, I always ask my guests to go back and talk about childhood. How were you raised? What was the home life like in terms of faith or philosophy? I'm assuming it was Catholic, but maybe not. And were there any bumps on the journey, adolescence, puberty, that sort of thing, and straying, sex, drugs, and rock and roll? Or were you just a good boy the whole time? Just tell us the whole story.
Sure, yeah. I wish I could say I was a good boy the whole time, but sadly, it's not the case. I have sort of a St. Augustine story, if you
Uh,
will. I was raised Catholic, cradle Catholic, born and raised in Metro Detroit. I've never lived anywhere else. And Yeah, yeah, like I said, come from, strong Polish Catholic roots on
yeah.
both sides of my family, both my mother and my father's side, very strong Polish Catholic families. Unfortunately, those families got caught up, in the 1960s and the fallout from, whatever it was, the culture, the Second Vatican Council, the spirit of Vatican II, all that jazz. And, unfortunately, my parents, were not very, catechized themselves. I mean, they did the best they could. Even I look at my grandparents' generation, the greatest generation, I could even see the moral decline there. And so for them to pass on the faith many times, that didn't even happen, even for generations that grew up prior to Vatican II. I didn't know any of this at the time growing up. I would find all of this out later. But yeah, I had a pretty normal middle class childhood. Nothing to really speak about there. We went to church, most Sundays. The faith, at least on paper, was very important to us. Um, I went to. I never went to Catholic school. For whatever reason. My parents couldn't afford it when I was younger. Then when I was older, they wanted to send me to a Catholic, like an all boys high school, and I just wasn't having it at that point in my life, because I was already 14, 15 years old, and had gotten into some things. Maybe if I would have started Catholic school at a younger age, maybe it would have had a better effect on me. But you never know. You don't live two lives, and this is the life that I got. So yeah, I grew up nominally Catholic, I'll say. So I made all my sacraments through, after school religious education. K, not K, but first grade through eighth grade through confirmation. Once a week I would go down to the parish and you'd have your CCD class, right? And because I wasn't really receptive to it as a kid, and I think the catechesis, the teachers, I think it was pretty poor, so that combination wasn't good for me. And I came away from that, not knowing. I'm sure it was said to me, I hope it was said to me, but I came away from that not knowing that Jesus was God, um, or like that the Catholic faith was any different than any other type of professed Christianity. I had no clue. So when I came back to my faith actually in my early 20s. So I'm going on probably 16, 17 years now as an actual serious Catholic. And there's a lot in between there, obviously. So when I was a teenager, I got into all kinds of stuff, the regular stuff that kids get into, partying, girls, and whatnot. Nothing too crazy, nothing too hardcore in terms of drug usage or anything like that. But the normal stuff that teenagers get into. I'm not trying to make excuses for any of that. Very, very sinful stuff that I'm ashamed for. So, I would say from the time I made my first confession, which is what? How old are you? Like second grade, maybe something like that. I forget when they exactly do it. All the way up until I was, I don't know, 19, 20 years old. I never went to confession in between that. So I had like a good, 12 years of unconfessed sin that I would go in and pour out and make my second confession. Um, so yeah, I mean, It's a long story, but I will say kind of what brought me back is I hit a real rock bottom point in my life. Like I said, late teens, early 20s. I had been dating a girl at the time. She happened to be Jewish, actually. Go figure.
Uh,
So you could tell the faith wasn't. I wasn't really picking a spouse based on religion at that point. I, uh, I didn't do in my latter high school career. I wasn't really that great of a student because not that I couldn't do it, I just didn't care. So I barely scraped by high school. Wasn't really. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life in my late teens, but I discovered video production. I had always been drawn to films and filmmaking and acting. I did a lot of acting and theater and improvisation growing up, middle school, high school, even elementary school. So I was always very concerned about what's going on both sides of the camera, so to speak. And so I said, as a late teen, I said I want to do that. I want to break into that industry somehow. I tried acting for a little bit when I was younger. Found out that you had to basically win the lottery to break into
mhm,
that type of business. And then I said, okay, well, maybe filmmaking, maybe directing, shooting, editing. That would be sort of my thing. So I was fortunate enough to go to a high school that had a strong video production program. Thanks be to God. Learned a lot about how to do that even at a very young age. And so I said, okay, that's what I want to do. I don't want to go to a 4-year college. I don't want to do any of that. All my friends went off to these very expensive 4-year colleges, and I'm glad I saved a lot of money because I didn't do that. I went straight to a local school here in the Metro Detroit area, which was a technical school, basically technical school for radio and broadcast production at the time. And that was great. That really kind of helped me, mature just, on a human level. I was still living a very sort of pagan, I would say, sinful lifestyle. But I started to mature a little bit in terms of my professionalism because I wanted to sort of break into that industry. Um, it was around this same time finishing up tech school. That only took a couple years or so. Like I said, I was dating a girl. We were we were actually about to move in together. Um, and then I get a job as a videographer for church services for these inner
mhm,
city black churches in Detroit.
uh,
So I mean, you know the type, the preaching, the music, it's like full gospel, all that stuff. So here's me, little old white kid from the suburbs, doesn't know anything about Christianity. I was raised Catholic, but I don't know what that means. And I start taping these church services and something starts to speak to me. I couldn't tell you what it was at the time. I didn't even know this was happening. For some reason, I had an old, dusty Bible on my shelf that my parents gave me probably a decade prior, and I just pulled it off the shelf, started reading the Bible, started right at Genesis chapter 1. I don't know why I did it, just started reading it. Um, Things start to get a little rocky in my relationship. I don't end up moving in with that particular girl um, because of one of the guys I met through taping those Protestant church services. Actually, he I was sort of talking to him about that. I'm like, hey, yeah, I'm about to move in with my girlfriend, blah blah blah, just small talk, and he sort of stopped dead in his tracks, and he said, well, hey, are you a Christian? He asked me if am I a Christian. We never talked about any of the type of stuff. I'm like, yeah, I guess so. I was raised Catholic. And then he starts, trying to evangelize me, basically telling me it wasn't right for me to move in with my girlfriend if we weren't married. And I'm like, really? I'm like, this is news to me. He
Bad
gives
news.
me, yeah, exactly. I'm like, I don't know about this. He gave me a couple, tapes and CDs and DVDs about the faith, more from a Protestant perspective. And that, I don't know, I watched those and I was like, man, these are kind of hitting home with me. And then, all of a sudden, I just my girlfriend and I, for various reasons, we split up. And like I said, we were getting pretty serious. We're going to move in together. And that sent me into like this, like I said, like a real low point in my life, sort of like a rock bottom. Got, the rug was pulled out under from me. Very, very depressed at that point. Um, I was working another job when that happened, a different job for a different studio here in the Detroit area. I was editing video at the time, and yeah, I just felt like my whole world was collapsing. And, people who, the general answer, or people who saw what I was going through then and saw that I was having this sort of conversion to the Christian faith, they asked me like, what the heck happened to you? And I tell people I didn't see a bright light. I didn't hear a voice from God or anything like that. But I got this, I think what scripture refers to that as that peace that surpasses all understanding, because what I started to do shortly after the breakup with my girlfriend was just kind of attempt to pray. I didn't know what that meant. No one showed me anything about mental prayer, adoration, benedict, and the mass, and anything. I didn't know anything about that. So I just said, I kind of just laid in my bed every night and I said, God, if you're real, if you want anything to do with me, then make me who you want me to be. It was like I don't know, it was the Holy Spirit inspired, a very unselfish prayer. I didn't pray that to get this or to get that or get back with my girlfriend or anything like that. I just said, God, mold me into who you want me to be. I didn't know what that was going to be. I mean, looking back now, I mean, it's been a wild, wild ride. Like I said, almost 17 years of being a pretty committed Christian. A lot of struggles still in between there, and that was it. I started to get that peace. A lot of my anxiety, a lot of my depression started to dissipate. I felt the way I'd never felt before. Uh, you know, I was looking at the world through brand new eyes, and I'm like, okay, there's something to this. I was never an atheist. I honestly was never, even in the depths of like my depravity when I was a teenager and a young adult. Um, I always I always believed in the general concept of a higher power and life just never made sense to me without that. You know what I mean? Like morality. I'm like, well, what the heck? What the heck's the point of life if there's no heaven or if there's no higher power or any of that stuff? Like, why even exist? I sort of realized the logical ends of nihilism at a very young age, even though I didn't articulate it as such. It's just always made sense that there was a higher power, that there was some sort of afterlife out there. But I just resigned myself to never investigate that, and well, you just be a good person and you'll be okay, type of thing. So yeah, that's sort of my conversion, really, in a nutshell, and that kind of led me down a path of um, ministry, I would say. For some people don't like that term when it's applied to laymen, but I think it's probably fine. Lay ministry. Obviously, we're not ordained or anything like that. I knew I wanted to do something right away. I knew I wanted to give back to this higher power that I found, and I toyed around with the first couple of years. I didn't know the difference between any sorts of denominations or Catholic and Protestant. I didn't know any of that stuff. So I thought I was really surprised to find out that there were differences between Protestants, the Orthodox, the Catholics, anyone else. So I had to investigate all that. So I was going to all kinds of different churches, different Bible studies, and things like that, just trying to figure it out. Thanks be to God, I've found my way, sort of investigated, studied, prayed my way back into the faith that I was supposedly raised in, which was Catholicism. So, I was baptized, confirmed. I didn't have to do anything except go back to confession eventually. But that took me a couple of years to do that, even from that initial conversion. Thought about the priesthood for a little bit. I was never a seminarian, but I I started taking classes at a seminary in hopes of one day being a seminarian. Never worked out. Thanks be to God, He showed me through some long, hard trials that I was not being called to the priesthood. I really thought I was, and God had to kind of hit me upside the head and say, "Nope, nope, you're not." Um, and then I got into sort of just lay ministry after that. I knew I really liked working with young people, teenagers specifically, and I knew that I always wanted to be a classroom teacher, because I had grown up and communications was very important to me. So I thought, well, hey, I'm into the faith. I think I'm decent at communications, so why don't I like merge the two things somehow? So, I did a lot of parish work, youth ministry, young adult ministry. Eventually got my dream of getting into a classroom. So from, what was that, 2014 to 2021, I was a classroom teacher I was a high school teacher in theology and philosophy. And after that, I left teaching. Actually, they forced me out. We can talk about that later. But
Sure.
I was forced to leave teaching, and then I went into to Catholic media, and I've been working for Church Militant for the past couple of years, and have a independent podcast too that I host with one of my coworkers. Again, it's not part of Church Militant. So yeah, that's what I've
Cool.
been. Yeah, a
Very
lot
good.
there. I know.
Well, I'll
Sorry to
dig
go.
in. Yeah, I'll dig in just here and there, but I'm just curious. I don't know if you mentioned the siblings. How many siblings do you have, if any?
I'm one of three boys.
Okay.
So I'm the oldest of three boys.
And
Yeah.
are they shocked by your reversion? Like, are they Catholic today, Christian, or what?
They're sort of, I mean, they're sort of non-practicing Catholics. I think if you were to ask them, they would identify as Catholic, but yeah, they don't really practice the faith unless they're sort of put on the spot. It's weird. These are my two younger brothers. Neither of them have any aversion to going to mass or anything like that, or even having conversations about the faith. But I find, I mean, the most difficult people to evangelize are your family members, unfortunately, because it's like, well,
Yeah.
these are the people you grew up with. These are the people that know, like, where all the bodies are buried and all the skeletons in your closet. And they saw you going. I mean, my brothers saw me going through some pretty rough times as a teenager. They were little kids at the time, and I gave them a very bad example, unfortunately. So I still have a lot of making up for that. But I hope to get them back to the faith one day.
Do you see yourself in them at all, or it's a completely different path that each of them saw?
A little bit. We're very similar. I've been burned by that before because I've had some of my brothers have went through sort of similar sort of rock bottom experiences,
Uh,
and then I'm like, oh, this is where they're going to turn it around, right? And it just didn't happen for that particular person at that particular time. So it's
yeah.
like, you just have to consign yourself to say, well, God's kind of got a plan for everyone, and maybe I should have said more or done more during that time. You never know.
Yeah. What about your parents? Are they still alive, and are they a little bit more Catholic today, or no?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, they are. I mean, yeah, they are. They do their best with what they have. I mean, they grew up at a very strange time, I think, in
Yeah.
the church post Vatican II. They just from what they've told me about what they experienced, the things that they were taught and the things that they saw. Whether it was the liturgy or, they went to Catholic school K through 12. My parents are actually high school sweethearts. They met
Oh,
here, yeah, in the Metro Detroit area at a Catholic school. And, so there's sort of a unique situation. And I don't know anyone else's parents that I grew up with who knew each other from school. I know it does happen, but yeah, so they gave me a good example of, family stability in terms of keeping the family together. I grew up, all my friends' parents were divorced,
oh,
um, and so they gave me a really good example of that. And having family is very, very important. I mean, I have a strong extended family, cousins, uncles. We're all in the Metro Detroit area, and we all stay in contact. So, I mean, family was always pushed very much. But in terms of the nitty gritty about morality and liturgy and orthodoxy in terms of Catholicism, yeah, it's still another work in progress, I would say, even with my parents.
thank you for that. I just want to give a shout out to a couple of friends in the live chat here, Daniel Drazinovich and Emily. Emily's asking a question, actually. I don't know what theolinguistics is, but she's asking if you ever thought about it, if you've ever encountered it, and what kind of career, if it's a career that you might be interested in.
Sure, she's asking if I ever thought about a career in linguistics.
Theolinguistics.
Theolinguistics. No, yeah, I mean, it's probably a specialized type of theology, where I'm assuming you would study like the biblical languages. Um, the languages were never my strong suit. I'll tell you that. Growing up, I took like Spanish in high school and things like that, and I was never great with languages until I got to the seminary and I had to take 2 years of like very intense ecclesial Latin.
Oh,
I never took any Greek. It's still one of my goals to actually dive into Greek. I know enough where I can be dangerous with it in terms of theology, but I was never super proficient in languages, and it's probably more than that. The theolinguistic field of discipline. There's things in philosophy too. Philology, things like that you can study, but yeah, so I hope that suffices.
yeah. I'm just curious. I didn't quite understand. There was the Jewish girl and another girl, and did you end up getting married, or what happened at the end?
Oh yeah. So yeah, I skipped over the most important. Besides the Blessed Mother, I would say, and my own mother, the most important woman in my life is my current wife. So, yeah, I was selfish. I told you just about myself. I didn't tell you about my family. So yeah, I've been married. I got married in 2013. All this kind of happened around the same time. So I would say, you know, I was probably 4 years into my walk with Christ. 2 years in the Protestant world, 2 years specifically very intensely Catholic. Like I said, I thought I was going into the priesthood. Um, there was the Jewish girl before that, and then I didn't date anyone for that 4 year period because I thought I was going to be a celibate priest. Like that was my goal. And then lo and behold, I was working some odd jobs trying to get through get through these classes at the seminary. Like I said, I went to tech school right out of high school, so I didn't have any prerequisites for any type of college. So I was trying to go to college almost full time, and I was trying to work almost full time, and then try to live my Catholic faith as well throughout all that process. Um, and then it was sort of a time where it was like, well, you've been taking classes for a couple of years at the seminary. How about you enter the seminary? I was talking to the vocations director, and along comes this coworker out of nowhere, and it was kind of just like one of those things where I was like, wow, I'm very interested. I'm very attracted in this woman, and that really threw me for a loop. I was
Mhm.
like, God, literally, I thought that I was supposed to go into the seminary right now, and is this just some sort of temptation and whatnot? And she wasn't even like a strong Christian at the time. She wasn't even Catholic. She was raised a nominally Episcopalian, but like we hit it off like right away, and it was just one of those things. It's cliche, but it happens. And I said, okay, well, maybe you know this is the discernment process right now. Maybe this is a sign from God. So I basically consigned myself to say, okay, I'm gonna pursue a relationship with this woman, and we'll see where God, I want God to show me like if this is wrong or not. And no, I mean, she was, I hate to use the cliche term of like a soulmate for someone, but God really knew what he was doing when he selected this woman for me. I mean, she gets me. It's sort of like a perfect situation. And I'm saying we're exactly the same. We have very, different interests and things like that. But the compatibility, that complementarity
Yeah,
rather
yeah.
is really there. So yeah, we've been married since 2013. We have 4 children.
Nice.
Yeah, thanks be to God. All under 10 years old, so it's a pretty crazy household.
Wow. Are there more on the way?
I don't know because we're not spring chickens, and my wife is a little older than I am, so
Okay.
it'll biologically we're sort of running up against the clock here. I want to get a fifth out of the deal if I'm being honest, but yeah, we'll see.
Did you give them Christian names from the Bible, or what did you do?
I and people are gonna get mad at me when I say this, but I sort of shy away from doing that. I know it's a great pious practice to do that. I don't knock anyone who's doing it, but it's always rubbed me the wrong way a little bit because I'm like, oh, you're just gonna pick a name from the Bible? Come on. No, I love it. I love it. Yeah, pick a saint's name, pick a Bible name or whatever. But no, honestly, we just like, at least for our first 3 children, we just picked names that we liked
Yeah.
that were usually came from TV shows or movies, to
Okay.
be honest with you. Like my like my oldest is Liam, not after Liam Neeson, but a Liam that we saw as a character on a show. We're like, oh, I love the name Liam. Same, well, similar story. My third son's name is Davis,
Oh, yeah.
Davis.
Ah.
And yeah, there's a Jake Gyllenhaal movie that we watched. I'm like, oh, I love that name, Davis. We're gonna put that in the bank and maybe name one of our kids that. And then we finally caved in. We had our first girl about a year ago, and so she's got 3 older brothers to protect her. We finally caved in because we love the name, and we have a strong devotion to Saint Philomena. So we named our daughter Philomena. So we got the saint name in there.
Well, but Liam, there's a Saint Liam, patron saint of religious jewelry and medals. So there you go.
I did not even know that. I always thought it was derived from William. Obviously, there was like a lot of Williams out there, but wow, did you just look that up, or
I
did
just
someone
Googled
send
it.
that?
Yeah. I don't carry that knowledge in my head.
I'll have to look. Medals and what was it? Medals and jewelry?
Yeah, religious medals and jewelry.
Ooh.
Yeah, so that's very cool. Wow, this kid's future's bright.
Yeah, we'll have to get him to start wearing his miraculous medal more.
Yeah, well, wasn't that today or yesterday?
Oh, was it the feast? Yeah.
St. Catherine Labouré or whatever it was. I don't know.
Yeah. Yep. Oh, yeah. Actually, I should know that. I wrote a paper on her in grad school. So yeah.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If you have I can tell you an interesting story about the miraculous medal.
Let's do it.
Obviously, didn't know what it was growing up. My grandmother, God rest her soul, great Catholic woman. This is my father's mother. How did this come about? She had a strong devotion to the miraculous medal. She wasn't too open about it, and she wouldn't like preach the miraculous medal, but I remember her always wearing one. And it was around that same time, I think I was in my old parish's library, just tooling around, looking at some of the books one day, I think after Mass. And I think there was a Catholic dictionary sitting on one of the tables, open to the page that defined and told about the miraculous medal. So I read about this thing. I'm like, oh, I think my grandmother wears that medal. A couple more things happen. So I see that in the parish library randomly. The thing is open to that book, and I go read about the miraculous medal. I watch a movie. I think it was like Minority Report or something like that. I don't know if you ever saw Minority Report, but Colin Farrell, who is it? Yeah, Colin Farrell, one of the actors in the movie. He has I think it's miraculous medal, or what I thought it was, and he kept kissing it throughout the movie. They never explained what it was. I'm like, is that the miraculous medal? And then like 2 days after that, I get in the mail from my grandmother a miraculous medal. I didn't even talk to her about it. I knew she wore one. We never talked about it. I see this movie with the miraculous medal in it. I see it in the parish library, and then she sends me one. And so I'm like, okay, here's your sign type of thing. I start wearing it. Eventually, like I forget when I wrote that paper on it. It was some years later, but it was going back to that event. And I mean, all the miracles that are connected to it are just really amazing. Yeah. And then at least one of my sons, because I sort of let them choose their own devotionals and necklaces and things like that they wear. One of them really likes the brown scapular. The other one, my second son, loves miraculous medal. He just he'll sleep in it if we wouldn't let him. I'm afraid it's gonna choke him, but
Good way to die.
Exactly. You got killed by a holy object. Okay.
There you go. Does your son know about your grandma that she wore the medal too?
He does. He's still pretty. I mean, well, what is it? He'll be 7 pretty soon, so it's probably we can probably tell him about that at this point. I forget these things. That's good that you reminded me. I mean, there's so many things. You try to do your best to catechize your kids and to tell them about your own faith life, but yeah.
Very cool. So, if it's not too nosy, what happened with the wife? Did she end up doing RCIA and converting, or?
Yeah, she did. Very early on. If you ask her, I don't know. I wouldn't say I was a great example of a Christian even at the time I met her, because I was still up and down and struggling with a lot of things from my past. But for whatever reason, you ask her back then, well, what was it that attracted you to Kyle? And God bless her, she says it was my faith. So apparently I was giving some sort of good witness to
Yeah.
her. And she was always searching. She was always on a path for God. I mean, I think we're all naturally disposed to reach out to the divine, but she knew, in a certain sense, she was. You know, she would go to different church services here and there, but nothing really made sense to her. But she knew she loved me, and she wanted to be part of my faith. And yeah, we went right ahead and got
Cool.
into RCIA. I was actually we did all of that even before we got engaged, because
Nice.
we dated for about 4 years. For various reasons, we probably would have got married sooner, but we had to work out some other things from her past. She had actually go through the annulment process.
Oh.
She was married previously for like less than a year.
Oh.
It was like, she'll admit she was very young and naive at the time, and she just randomly, got married to some guy. It wasn't in a church, it was just a civil ceremony. And obviously it was the wrong guy, because she didn't stay married to him for too long. And so she actually, I mean, even in that case, you still have to go through the annulment process with, your particular archdiocese. So that sort of held things up, because that could be, that's at least a year's process sometimes.
Longer
Sometimes
than she
longer.
was married.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's funny. Well, you'll invite her onto my show, because I like to interview the spouses of my guests. It's always
Oh,
fascinating. So just
how,
invite her on. I know she's probably shy and all that, but just invite her anyway.
so how many do you actually take you up on that?
I've had 3 or 4 out of
Okay.
300 guests, so it's
Okay.
about.
I will run it by her. Yeah, I don't know if she'll say yes, but I will run it
We
by her.
expect a firm no, but you never know. You never know. You never know. It's always fun though to get the other side of the story. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Fascinating. So that's pretty much you've caught us up to date with the biographical stuff. What about today? Like, I want to know, like, you woke up this morning. Did you work today? Like, what's your prayer routine? Do you pray in the morning? Do you pray at night? What are the devotions that you have? Do you belong to any confraternities? Do you go to Latin Mass only, or FSSP, or like, what's the story? Just paint a picture of today. Like, what are you doing today?
Sure. Well, I mean, like I said, I work for Church Militant, and one of the beautiful things about working for a Catholic apostolate, a media organization like that, is that we structure prayer into our day.
Ah,
Obviously everyone should be, praying private devotions and things like that. But a lot of my prayer is actually part of my work, and not just in the sense that I'm talking about the faith or writing about the faith. It's that I'm actually praying with my coworkers. That was one of the beautiful things about the way that our organization was set up. So we actually broadcast it live, 8 a.m., 4:45 p.m. Eastern Standard
oh,
Time, I believe. So you can actually tune in on the Church
oh,
Militant website, and we have morning prayer from the breviary,
oh.
the new breviary. And we do the entire morning prayer. We do a rosary, and then we have some other various apostolate specific prayers that we pray for, our donors and our benefactors and things like that. And we start our prayer, our day off with about 45 minutes of prayer every morning. um, Middle of the day, I'll have a strong devotion to the Angelus. Then we do Divine Mercy Chaplet around lunchtime as well. And then, we end the day too, same thing with the evening prayer from the breviary, and some other, like I said, various prayers. So that would be just my
Wow.
work, my
Wow.
work prayer. So I'm very blessed to work in
Yeah.
a place
You get paid to
that's
pray. You get paid to pray.
exactly, exactly. And then even when I was a teacher, like I said, for about 8 years, I was a Catholic high school teacher, and we were blessed enough to have a chapel at our Catholic high school. All Catholic high schools should have a chapel, but some are connected to parishes, some aren't. We were run by a religious order. It wasn't part of a parish, but we still had a small chapel in it, with a tabernacle that was always filled. And so I there was times I could take, throughout every day to go do just private Eucharistic adoration. I mean, that was a huge blessing. I would stop in there just for a couple minutes in the morning, and then I would hopefully have more of an extended period later in the day. But yeah, great blessing for
Wow.
that. So yeah, I mean, rosary. In terms of my family, we don't do a full rosary every day. We do one decade because the kids are, they're crazy. They
Young,
can
yeah.
only make it through one. I know some families that have like more kids than I do that do the entire rosary. I'm like, God bless you guys. I don't know how you do it. I don't know what your secret is, but we at least get that in there. And various little prayers throughout the day. Actually, my son this morning reminded me, because I actually worked from home this morning. And my son, as soon as he woke up, he reminded me. He's like, Dad, we got to do morning prayer. So I'm like, man, I'm like, that's awesome that you're reminding me about that.
Wow. Very nice. So your kids, they have already memorized a bunch of prayers.
They do, yeah. I mean, the normal ones: Our Father, Hail Mary, Glory be. The various prayers of the Rosary. They know, Angel of God prayer. I'm starting to work with them more now on the prayers of the Mass. You asked, what type of Mass I go to. We split our time. It's kind of, our schedule's always kind of crazy, up in the air. But fortunately, we have a lot of good Mass options, both new Mass and old Mass here in the Metro Detroit area. So, there were periods of our time where we went to like strictly Latin Mass, but we found some really good parishes that do the new Mass. And so I'm not really picky about any particular expression of the liturgy. I always have to get
Yeah.
that right, because they're not two separate rites. They are two expressions of the same rite.
Yeah. So, I don't want to get too much into the politics because I hate the politics, but it's everywhere in the church. And, when I first converted in 2009, I'd been atheist for 25 years and got into some dark stuff at the end of my atheism. But, one of the first things I watched, other than, Mother Angelica, EWTN, was Michael Voris, the Vortex, and I used to love that segment. And, I still have a soft spot for him. I think he's a sweet guy, and I think he holds up well under the troubles he's had to go through and whatnot. I haven't been following it. This is kind of my point, is that I stopped following Catholic media just because I found it was too abrasive and too controversial, and there's too much drama. And I want the dust to settle for a couple hundred years, and then look at the history books. What happened? What happened?
Yeah.
Let the church tell me what happened. I don't want to hear your spin and everyone else's spin and all the different he said, she said, and all that sort of thing. So
In real time.
yeah, how do you protect yourself? How do you spiritually have self-defense against Satan? Because Satan wants to divide us. He wants to destroy the church. And it's very, very obvious online, on the internet. It's like that's where Satan does his best work, I would say.
Yeah, and it's sort of a catch-22 for me, because I work in Catholic media, both for an organization and for myself, with my own podcast. I mean, my goodness, what has really taught me a lot of it is just time management. I think it was. I want to attribute it to C.S. Lewis. I believe he said something to this effect. Someone asked him one time of how much media should you consume? And this is back in C.S. Lewis's day, where it was like, you had a newspaper, right? You didn't have like 24-hour news cycle, 24-hour scrolling on your phone or whatever. So this is even in that time period. They asked Lewis, what is your media consumption like? And he said something basically to the effect of, if you're going to consume media, do like a weekly paper or something like that. Read it once a day. I'm sorry, once a week. He's like, don't get the daily paper, because you're just gonna, be caught up in who said this and who said that, and it's gonna cause you a lot of anxiety in your life. I mean, yeah, it's funny. Going through. We talked before we rolled, I believe, about the fact that I did Exodus 90 a couple times, and I mean that was an eye opener in terms of how am I to regulate my media consumption and what is good for me. It's really hard as a single person, I will say, because I lived, a lot of my post-conversion life, or a good chunk of it, as a single young adult trying to figure things out. And I just had a heck of a time with still anxiety and looking at different things and spending too much time on the internet or too much time looking into the, even if it was good stuff, you know, in terms of like,
Right.
oh, I'm going to learn about what's going on in the church right now. What really taught me to regulate that was more providential, and it had to do with having a family, with marriage and family, honestly, because I would see real-time effects of me being an absent father in certain situations. So whether it was me, you know, working too much, you know, like back when I was a teacher and I could plan lesson plans for the next 10 years. So like my work was never done. I could grade for hours and hours every day. The work was never done. And I would fall into that sometimes and I would see, you know, oh, my kid is noticing that and he's like asking me to play with him type of thing. So he knows that I'm spending
Mhm.
too much time on this. So it was like a real time, visceral type of thing where I had to experience the effects of my absence on my family. And I'm still not perfect at regulating that because you know my workday could still never end because you know Twitter is there. I'm actually not even on Twitter, but I still see things that other people send me that are on Twitter. It's like you can't escape it. Like what is going on here? So yeah, it's a lot of it's just literally just time management and saying I'm logging off now and I'm going to be with my family for a few hours like I did before this show. It's like I ended my workday at 5. I shut my computer down and I'm like I'm going to go like not I'm gonna go play with the kids. I'm gonna go
Yeah.
help my wife as she's getting ready for dinner, and I'm not going to physically do anything with any device. And I'm not going to think about something either because I could be still thinking about things that are going on with my workday and like looking like I'm interacting with my family. You know what I mean? So that's
Yeah.
just on the natural level. That's literally just on the natural
Yeah.
level. And the spiritual stuff obviously too, you have to be steeped in prayer and you got to stick to your prayer regimen. And if you're not doing that, that is not only a crack but I think you know halfway open or a wide open door even to demonic influence because the devil knows exactly what is needed in your particular situation to get you to fall. He's smarter than you. Obviously you have a lot more graces that can overcome that. Your guardian angel, the sacraments, all that stuff is way more efficacious than anything the devil could ever do to you, but it's still there. He's still going to try to do it.
Yeah.
So if you're not taking those opportunities of grace, of sacraments, of prayer, of spiritual reading, of living a disconnected life in terms of technology when you need to be disconnected, then you're going to fall. It's you know it's just too powerful. It's too much of a double-edged sword. I love technology in terms of what it can do and you know bringing people across great distances together and things like that. But there honestly needs to be someone needs to do some, and I'm sure they have, but some more work on the virtue of like technological like regulation. Um, Someone needs to write that book. Maybe I'll do it. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think Pope Francis wrote a book to the youth about that, how to moderate
Mm,
your use of technology and stuff like that. I forget what it's called, but I got a question from Emily. She asks you, can a non-Catholic pray the whole rosary? She said, are the beads required? Explain it to me like I'm 5 years old. So just give her a little, a little explanation of the rosary, how it could benefit a non-Catholic too.
sure. Yeah, I mean, anyone is permitted, allowed to do, I don't want to say any Catholic practice because, you know, non-Catholic, you know, wouldn't be permitted to like go up at Mass and receive the Holy Eucharist. But a non-Catholic could attend Mass. I think non-Catholics should attend Mass. Maybe they'll, you know, get something out of it and get exposed to the beauty of the faith and our Lord right there on the altar and all that stuff. And the same thing is true with any Catholic practice, barring some of the sacraments, I think. So, yeah, it would be perfectly appropriate for a non-Catholic to be interested or investigate or to even start praying the rosary. And there's so many, I mean, gosh, it's so many different angles because I've been asked this before, and it's hard to know what angle to start at with introducing someone to the rosary because it can be a jarring thing. Like, okay, you have this thing that looks like a necklace, and it's got these beads on it. And to answer Emily's question, part of her question there, you don't need a rosary to pray the rosary. I've literally prayed the rosary like on my hands before when I didn't have a rosary. Um, and it's jarring to people at first, I think, because of the repetition, because it looks like you're just repeating the same thing over and over again, like you're, putting coins in a slot machine or something, and you think you're gonna that's like, I think a lot of the accusations that Catholics get is you're just saying a bunch of the Hail Mary prayer, or you're just saying a bunch of Our Fathers, and you think you're gonna like get something from God because of the amount of these prayers that you say. And that's not what really the rosary is all about. I mean, without going into the whole history of it, it briefly it developed because of illiteracy, actually. So the monks back in the day, the monks would pray the entire Psalter, all 150 psalms, depending on your translation of the Bible, 150 of them. Monks would pray those every day. I mean, that's not just a Christian tradition; that's a Jewish tradition as well. Our Lord knew and prayed all the psalms, and so did his Jewish contemporaries. And so that got transferred into Christianity in the early centuries, and monks would, pray the Psalter every day, and they pray 150. Then you have, an apparition. I forget if it happened before or after, but not everyone could read. Laymen who wanted to pray the Psalms too, along with the monks, couldn't read. I mean, most of humanity has been illiterate for most of human history, and so people who wanted to participate in that would simply say prayers on beads to match those 150 psalms. And so they would put prayers that they could memorize, like like the Hail Mary. And it took a while for the Hail Mary actually to develop into what it is now. I mean, most of it is taken from literal words of Scripture. Some of it is added later in that. You have Saint Dominic coming in and actually, Our Lady told him, about this devotion, and that sort of, I don't want to say codified it. And then you have various popes over the centuries who have said, okay, here's what it is here, and even up until John Paul II, who added, another set of mysteries to the Rosary, which I think is beautiful. A lot of people were upset that he did that, but I think it's a very fine and good thing. So yeah, I mean that's really the history of it. But I would say this: the best way I've heard of it explained in a nutshell, what is the Rosary? It is the Bible on beads. So the Rosary, especially for our Protestant brothers, it's it's very scriptural, because you're not just saying these prayers, Our Father, Hail Mary, over and over again. There's actually what they call mysteries of the Rosary, and these are events in the life of Christ, his ministry, all throughout the Gospels. For instance, we pray, one of the mysteries is the Nativity. So we're going to be coming up on Advent pretty soon, then coming up on Christmas following that. We're celebrating the birth of our Lord at the Nativity. So, I mean, picture yourself, in the stable, looking at our Lord in the manger, seeing, the wise men come at the Epiphany, seeing the choirs of angels talking to the shepherds. I mean, there's a lot to meditate on in that. And you could sit there and do that, but you get distracted. So when it comes to the Rosary, it sets an amount of time where you meditate on each, what we call mystery, an event in the life of Christ, like his birth at the Nativity. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm not really focused when I'm praying the Rosary so much on praying the 10 Hail Marys. I am focused on the Nativity. I'm in the moment. I'm thinking about it. What is Our Lady experiencing here? What is Saint Joseph experiencing here? It doesn't even have to be that. I'm just in there. Sometimes I look at a picture. I like to look at pictures when I pray. So I pray and I look at a picture, a depiction of, let's say, the Nativity. And so I just meditate on that for however long it takes you to pray 10 Hail Marys. And then I move on, to the next events, the presentation, the ascension, the resurrection, whatever it is. So what you should be doing is meditating on the life of Christ, and you're also offering your rosary up for particular intentions. You can say that and think about that beforehand, if you're praying for your sick grandmother in the hospital, for example. So there's the rosary, there's a lot going on in the rosary. I highly, it's really, changed my spiritual life when I actually, took up a devotion to it, because I didn't start praying the rosary immediately. It was very hard for me at first to actually get into that devotion, but I can't do without it now, honestly.
Yeah. Well, Emily, you should read some good books on it. St. Louis de Montfort, he's one of my favorites, and he wrote an excellent book, The Secret of the Rosary, and he's written a lot on the Rosary. He's one of my favorite saints. I've got a quick question for you from thank you for that, by the way, but I got a quick question for you from Daniel Drazinovich. He's wondering what you think about asceticism. And I read the Philokalia. It took me 11 months to read it. It's the Desert Fathers of the East, early writings. It goes for centuries, but many, many writings, a lot of repetition. It's all about controlling our appetites. Have you read about it, or have you practiced? Are you good at fasting? What's your relationship with self-control and all that sort of stuff?
I think I want to be good at it. You know what I mean? It's like one of those things that I aspire to.
Yeah.
If I am, as I would say I'm a lot more mature than I used to be. I think that's true for everyone. I hope that's true for everyone. As a guy in his late 30s now, I'm a lot more mature than I used to be. If somehow you transported this me back into 19-year-old Kyle Kopy, I think I could really start to get into, and I don't want to say be good at, the ascetical life and those type of practices, but I think it takes a lot of maturity, and a lot of people, at least just speaking for myself, maybe I wasn't really ready to do that, especially at a young age. I would try to, but it was really hard. Fasting in particular has always been an interesting one for me, because I grew up. Actually didn't discover this until around the same time I had my conversion, actually in my middle early to mid 20s. I grew up with blood sugar issues. Like I'm not like a diagnosed diabetic or anything like that. Um, what I think but I had these bouts of low blood sugar. I think it's just due to poor diet as a kid. I ate a lot of sugar, a lot of candy, especially when I was a teenager. I could buy my own food. Young adult, I started making my own meals. I like, crap, basically. So a lot of it was just the poisonous food I was eating. And then I started to, gain weight. My metabolism dropped down. I started to gain weight, and I started having like a lot of low blood sugar issues. So long story short, I always thought, when I found out about fasting, I always thought like I really wasn't a candidate for it. And like, that's, a legitimate reason for some people. Some people cannot fast, like biologically, medically. I thought that was me. Another long story short, I sort of fixed a lot of those health issues, natural way, diet and exercise and whatnot, lost some weight. That really helped a lot with the blood sugar issues. And then finally, it was a handful of years ago that I really like, okay, let's try fasting again. And this was, I mentioned Exodus 90.
Yeah.
This was actually part of that program, where I'm like, okay, I was really scared to do it because of the fasting element. Like I thought like I was going to get low blood sugar and I was going to pass out and all that craziness that goes along with that. But thanks be to God, I was in a spot where I was pretty good physically, in terms of my health, and weight and all that. And it just kind of clicked, and it was an eye opener for me in terms of, I always understood like kind of the theology behind it. Yes, we're sacrificing for God, and we're joining our sacrifices to the sacrifice of Christ on the cross, and He can use that efficaciously. And fasting could be a sacrifice that you participate in. Also, to you are giving up something that you need and want, like food, and that's supposed to remind you of your need for God. I understood a lot of like the theory behind fasting, but it wasn't until I started fasting where I started. Some things you just have to experience. Some things you should never experience. Like, like the old phrase, "Don't knock it till you try it." No, that doesn't always work. Because it's like, don't try heroin. Like, you can knock heroin even if you don't try heroin. Like, don't do certain things. But all good things in moderation, right? So, when I started fasting, I got this. It's sort of counterintuitive, right? Because you're like, well, I'm not putting calories into my body. I'm going to be like sluggish all day. I actually had the opposite effect. I had like way more energy, way more mental clarity, way less, like mood, type of things, anxiety or whatever like that. Way less of that when I fasted. It was almost like I was in, I guess what they call like a flow state or something like that. You're just like in the zone in the moment. So like there were a lot of natural effects that I felt from it. And then two, and then all the other, theoretical stuff I talked about came. It was easier to pray. Um, it just, yeah, it took the spiritual life to the next level. So yeah, I would say I would love to get more into my asceticism. It's hard with having, full-time job, and you come home and you have the full-time job of being a dad. So you really have to be super disciplined with it, and wake up early, do these things before the kids wake up, and things like that. And you mentioned the Desert Fathers. I talked about how I wrote a paper of St. Catherine Labouré, and then I also wrote a paper and had a strong devotion to St. Anthony of the Desert, St. Anthony
Oh,
of Egypt. I
oh,
found his life tremendously inspiring. A man who, grew up pretty well to do. He had a pretty good, wealthy family. I believe if I'm getting it right, something happened with his parents. They may have both died, or I forget what happened, but he was sort of the benefactor of his younger siblings. So he had to take care of them for a while. And then he got that call from God, and he got his siblings set up, and he went into the desert and just, I mean, spent years and years in solitude, and people sought him out for counsel. And he would be attacked by demons in the nights, these apparitions sort of demons, and they would, God let that happen to him, and he was faithful throughout all that. But the interesting thing about St. Anthony is he kept getting called back into public life at some certain points in his
mm,
life, I think to address some heresies back in, in the, whatever, forget what his area region was, back in whatever town that would be. He kept getting called back in to give people counsel, to help out with the eradication of a heresy. But after he was done with that, he was always like, I'm going back to the desert. I'm going back to live with God. And not everyone is called to that. I mean, we're all called to it to a certain degree and to various particular instances of it in our lives, but we're not all called to be monks or nuns or anything like that, and live an intense life of prayer. A lot of us are called to live very public lives, which at a certain point, might be harder. I mean, one
mm.
on one, I could pray all day with God, but I got to go out and I got to, deal with the guy at the grocery store. I got to deal with a contractor coming over to fix my furnace. Like it's the hardest thing is like the day to day, human interactions, trying to live out your faith in just the normal secular world.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, Saint Paul warns us, better to marry than to burn. But I mean, if you marry, you're gonna have to you're gonna be trying to please your wife. It's just
Yep.
that's the way it is.
Yeah.
He wanted to spare those who could be spared. But I'm married. I'm happily married, even though it's challenging because she's very anti-Catholic, unfortunately. But she's culturally Greek Orthodox, so you'll
Oh,
pray
okay.
you'll pray for me and for her, but
Absolutely.
we love each other. But
Absolutely.
I want to just quickly before we wrap up here, I want to ask about your podcast. You haven't really talked about it, and I haven't seen it. What's the motivation? What's the theme? What do you do? Interviews, or you just chat about current events? What do you do?
We do both. So the podcast is called Kyle and Dave Contra Mundum.
Ah,
We just actually branded. I'm a sort of a reluctant podcaster. I had to be like my students back when I was a teacher. My students would always say, "Oh, you should start a podcast, Mr. Kopy. You should start a podcast." I'm like, "Well, I really like them. I listen to all types of podcasts. Some really eclectic things sometimes." Sort of the Joe Rogan asks,
okay.
Lex Friedman asks. Like I like hearing from different perspectives and different people. So I always liked them, and I guess yeah, I've had a career in media, so it'd kind of be a natural fit. Um, my co-host David Gordon. Some of your viewers might know him. He has had somewhat of a more of a high profile career in Catholic media, I would say. Um, he started his own podcast just a couple years ago by himself. He was on a bigger platform at that time. working with his brother, but for various reasons he had to strike out on his own. And it was just him, and he didn't really know a lot of the technical stuff behind podcasts. And we met at Church Militant, and we sort of were basically the same age. We have a very similar family situation, and very similar theological outlook. And he said, some people suggested, hey, why don't you guys do a podcast? And we said, okay. So we've tried it. We've been at it for about 6 months, and it's still very small. We do interviews, current events, just things from a masculine Catholic perspective. I hate talking. Sometimes we do wade into the politics stuff, and even some of the stuff going on at the church, in the church and things like that. But we always want to approach it from a perspective of piety and obedience, especially to the Holy Father, because we see a lot of
Nice.
that, a lot of just dissent in terms of rejecting a lot of valid things that are Catholic, unfortunately. And I run in a lot of these circles and have a lot of friends in that realm every day, and that's sort of where my evangelistic efforts have been put. When I first came back to the faith and came back to Catholicism more specifically, a lot of my work and my apologetics were things that were engaging atheists and engaging non-Catholics, Protestants, and things like that. Listen to a lot of Catholic Answers and Catholic Radio, EWTN, like you mentioned. So it was always that. But nowadays, I think we sort of have a new problem with what are called pseudo-traditionalists, I think is a way to say it. And a lot of good, well-meaning people. I was sort of tracking down that path, along my spiritual journey. And it's a very unfortunate thing. I think we're going to see a lot more division in the church before it gets better. I predict it's going to get worse before it gets better, unfortunately. So it's going to take a lot of good, obedient, pious Catholic voices to help people come away from that, because they're very well-meaning people who love our Lord and tradition and liturgy and the ancient teachings of the faith and all that. But there's some real problems, I think, within those communities, and that's sort of what we didn't really know what the podcast was going to be at first, but it seems like we're sort of tracking towards like the
moderating that a bit, that tendency.
Exactly.
Well, there's a whole R&R, recognize and resist thing, and I call it rad trads, and that's sort of my pet peeve, because I want Christian unity. That's what I want, especially since I'm married to an Orthodox. It's very important to me.
Yeah.
And it's very important to Jesus Christ, that we be one. And, it's just, I've got my own faults and my own sins, and I'm trying to focus on getting right with God and getting to heaven, frankly. But, at the same time, I am concerned about my neighbor, and I have to love my neighbors myself. So it is a concern. I had Michael Lofton on my show. I like him because he seems to defend the living magisterium. And, I don't watch him or anything. I've seen bits and pieces here and there, but every time I see him, he seems to be defending the living magisterium. And, he has, his little criticisms of something Pope Francis would say, maybe it wasn't the best idea or whatever, as we can all have. I think it's valid. I disagree with the Pope about, the COVID vaccination and all that. I don't think he should have been pushing that. But I respect his opinion. I think he believes, he trusts the science, whatever, that's fine. I don't, so, and things like evolution, I don't believe in evolution. It seems like the recent popes give it too much credence. They trust the science. It just seems worldly to me. It's just clear to me that creation is the case, Where do you stand on the whole evolution and creation question?
That I would track more with the recent popes. I've never gotten too much heavy. I know, my goodness, you can talk to guys like Jimmy Akin or gentleman Lazar, I think is his last name.
Gideon Lazar.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I know those are two good guys present, both sides of it. I think, right?
Did you watch that debate, that little mini debate?
I didn't see the whole thing. I knew it happened, and I saw bits and pieces of it. But I both, I've highly respected both of those guys and their work on it. My perspective has always been, it's been kind of surface level in that, basically what I tell people because I've had to deal with this, with young students and parents and things like that in a Catholic school. And it's basically, well, the Catholic Church actually presents both of those things as valid options if you don't take, sort of a more atheistic evolution as your starting point. If it's more of a theistically, a specifically theistically guided evolution with some very strong points of divine intervention along that way. Original catalyst is God. At each individual stage of the evolutionary theory, God would have had to done something very, very miraculous here. I mean, these things couldn't have just happened naturally. But could he have done it that way? Sure. So I've went back and forth on it in my own faith journey.
It's not an issue. It's really not an issue to me. The age or whatever, how God did it. The only issue for me is, the dogmas. Like God created a good world. He didn't create thorns and thistles and death and disease. Right. And the Immaculate Conception, like Saint Maximilian Kolbe said, like if Adam had been conceived in the womb, he would necessarily have been conceived without sin because he didn't sin until he was out of the womb. Right. So it's a violation of that. And there's so many dogmas, like the dogma that the soul is the form of the body. Now, you can invoke miracles at every step, sure. But, I mean, it's just stretching credibility. And, to me, it's just like paradise, God created a good world. And Adam and Eve were our superiors, period. There's no discussion about that. They were our superiors in every way. In every way. You can't fall up. They didn't fall up, okay? They fell down, So that's my main beef with evolution. And I know, the theistic evolutionists, they'll have a workaround for everything. But at a certain point, I just think it just becomes easier just to go with the fathers, go with St. Augustine and all the fathers. They knew about the stories, of the Hindus and the great ages and evolution. Even, the Greek philosophers had stories of evolution. So, I mean, I think it's more elegant to go with the traditional teaching on that. But I'm not putting anyone down who believes otherwise. It's a small thing. My friend Haley in the live chat, hello to you. She's asking if I'm going to get your partner David on my podcast. I hope so. Will you put in a good word for me and maybe send me his email address or something? Is he very busy? Is he busier than you are, or will he come on talk to me?
I think we have the same amount of busyness, but no, I will tell you right now, sign him up. He'd be more than happy to come on.
Absolutely. Cool. Yep. Very cool. I've only seen him briefly, like once when my friend sent me one of your videos. I didn't watch it, but I just sort of saw the image of both of you, and he kind of reminded me a little bit of Ronnie O'Sullivan, the greatest snooker player to ever walk the earth. I don't know if you know.
I'm gonna have to look him up because I'm always he'll get a kick out of comparing him to anyone. So
he reminds me of a few people. His face, he's got a special face. His brother Tim agreed to come on the show, but he just sort of ghosted me. He never came. I think he's R&R, recognize and resist. Is that correct? Is that safe to say? Or
I'm sure. Yeah, I don't want to speak for him, but no. I would assume that from what I know of him, that's probably his outlook. Yeah.
Have you met people like him or Michael Matt, and these sorts of people? Have you met them in real life, in like face to face?
I've never met. I've never met either of the two, or some of these other people that are in the same vein in Catholic media or in Spotlight. But I definitely know people that know them. Actually, yeah, my co-host, has done shows with Marshall. His brother obviously used to do a show with Marshall. Some of your viewers might know that.
Right.
So yeah, I'm sort of secondhand in all that. I know people who know them, and a lot of the times now, I find we find ourselves, really challenging those people and speaking out against them for what we think are some of the false things that they're saying. Obviously, we get attacked because, we're apparently going after our fellow Catholics and whatnot, and we simply say no. I mean, we challenge some things that they say, and that's about it. Take it or leave it type of thing.
Haley's asking if you've met James Altman.
I've never formally met him. I've been in the same room as Father Altman. I think we can still call him Father. I don't know if he's actually been. I know he's been suspended from ministry. I don't know if he's. I don't think he's been laicized yet. But no, I've been around him, just never introduce myself.
Is it true? Is it true that Michael Lofton's going to start getting involved with Church Militant, or is that like, did I misunderstand the rumors that were going around?
Well, yeah, it depends. I mean, we just released a video, an interview between my friend David Gordon and Michael Lofton. Dave and I both have had well, not both of us. We just had Michael Lofton on our show. We just went on his show recently
Okay.
within the past couple weeks.
Cool.
So yeah, we have a relationship with Michael Lofton. I think that he is one of the very important figures in I don't want to call it a battle, but just in sort of this movement, this critique of the radical traditional movement. I think it's coming from a place of a strong personal journey for him, because he went from Eastern Orthodox, from radical traditionalism to Eastern Orthodox to back to what I think is actual Catholicism, right thinking Catholicism, and is now trying to tell everyone about that through magisterial apologetics. And it's one of those areas, I think, a lot of people know a lot about morality and bioethics and biblical apologetics. There's a lot of people, a lot of laymen who know how to do that, and I think very well, and you can look up things on that or whatever. But in terms of like magisterial ecclesiology, there's not a lot of resources out there for laymen to turn to, unfortunately. Even me who has a graduate level degree in theology, I still had to do a lot of digging on my own to find out a lot about this stuff. And Michael Lofton, I think, is important because he's providing that for the average person. And what that does is it clarifies a lot of things about why Pope Francis said what he did, or why this document seems confusing. And it honestly brings a lot of people a lot of peace, is what I've found, instead of people being really upset with what the Pope said, or misinterpreting what the Pope said and getting angry and thinking that the church has been eclipsed and all this stuff. I'm like, no, I belong to the indefectible Catholic Church, and it's going to be visible. You're always going to know where it is. It's never going to be some underground remnant, and that's how our Lord wanted it,
Yeah, absolutely. I did interview, excuse me, a very controversial priest, Father James Martin. So I want to get your impression, like, people love him or hate him, it seems. And, the people that love him, they seem to be pushing LGBTQ stuff. So just wondering, how do you handle that, especially given the sort of stamp of approval that he seems to get from the Vatican, from our Holy Father? To me, I'll just be honest with you, it makes me want to hope against hope that he is Orthodox and that he's not preaching anything that's unorthodox. Like, maybe he misspeaks and maybe he's sloppy at times, but so is Pope Francis, right? So I'm really hoping he's a good guy, and I liked him when I interviewed him. But what's your gut tell you?
Yeah, again, I don't want to slander him, and if he did, I'm not saying he does, but if he did have some nefarious motive for wanting to change the church's teachings, which I think there's a good argument for that, particularly about the same-sex attraction issue. If he did, he's very crafty, I think, about in terms of the words he selects and the way he speaks about it. I think he's very careful to walk that line of saying things that are just right up until the edge of heterodoxy, but he might not actually always cross that line. I suspect, and it's just a suspicion, I don't want to say I know, but I suspect he's doing that intentionally. I mean, my goodness, if a good resource to send people to is actually Church Militant has a whole resource page on Father Martin.
Okay.
And we've tracked a lot of the problematic things that he's done over the years. So I would encourage people to search Church Militant, Father James Martin. You should be able to find that resource page out there. But personally, I just do really have the unfortunate suspicion that he does think that the church is wrong. I mean, these are definitive teachings too, so you really can't question them. That he does really think that the Bible is wrong about what it says about same-sex attraction and action. That the church's teachings, the catechism, should be changed on that, and he's doing it all under the guise of, well, we need to reach out to these people, we need to be welcoming. And I would agree with those terms, reach out and be welcoming. But I think Father Martin and I might have a different definition of what reaching out and being welcoming is. He runs an organization called, I believe it's called Outreach Ministries, part of America Magazine. And you contrast that ministry with something like Courage, which actually authentically helps same-sex attracted people live a chaste life, as to where places like Outreach, it seems like those places want to affirm them in their the disordered actions. And it's no one's fault that they have a same-sex attraction, but I believe with what the Catechism says about that, and even what psychologists say about that, if you want to go down that route, that it is, it is a disorder, and it's an unfortunate that many people are afflicted with this. And yeah, he's right in the sense that we'd have to be open and welcome, but we do have to always tell the people truth in charity. And some people are you're not gonna take that the right way, and they're gonna think we're gonna be we're gonna think they're gonna think that we're attacking them, but that's not what we're doing. We're trying to help them live authentic lives, and I'm not going to say it's easy for any temptation for that matter.
Yeah.
To grow up with any type of addiction or any type of mental illness that you have that makes you want to do a certain thing, that's going to be hard. I know alcoholics, I know people with sex addictions, who struggle with that type of stuff, and it's always this crossover between the psychological, the spiritual, and the physical, all rolled up into one. So yeah, no one's saying it's going to be easy, but it has to be done. And I really think that Father Martin is not doing the type of outreach that should be done to these souls who are affected with that.
Yeah, I do want to say, I do want to say I've read some stuff about him, and people have sent me his own words, from his books and whatever. And, it is disturbing. It's highly disturbing. But the one time that I fact-checked one of these, nasty comments that came out of one of his books, I happened to own one of his books, and that was one of them, and I haven't read it yet, but I looked up the citation that I was sent. And if you read a little bit further in the paragraph, it clearly says that, the church cannot change its teaching on homosexuality, and that it's never going to be accepted in the church. So I think there might be a little bit of cherry picking going on the right to sort of smear him when he may be giving a more balanced approach in his own work. And again, I admit, I'm guilty as charged for trying to give the benefit of the doubt maximally to him because of his proximity to Pope Francis. But how do you feel about Pope Francis? Because some of my guests, they're not recognized and resist. They're just Catholics without any prefixes, as I am. But they find fault with Pope Francis, and I've admitted I disagree with him about the jab, and I disagree with him about climate change and evolution. But how do you reconcile that? Is that just normal? The Pope's a human, and he's going to have his opinions, and of course we're not going to agree. Is that how you sort of resolve the tension of disagreeing with the Holy Father, the Vicar of Christ?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things going on. There's the critique that could fall on a couple things. It could be in the way he's managed the church, in terms of the people that he puts in the curia, the appointments, who he elevates to being a cardinal and a bishop, some of the managerial things. I think there's a lot of criticism that we could give him there. When it comes to that stuff, people talk about Theodore McCarrick. He basically exonerated McCarrick. The same thing with Father Rupnik and the whole sexual scandal, and meeting with people like James Martin and Nancy Pelosi. There's a lot of bad optics, I will admit, when it comes to Pope Francis. So I don't think he's very savvy when it comes to how things at least could look when he's meeting with people, when he's meeting with same-sex attracted partners, for instance, and all these things. So I don't really think he's too media savvy when it comes to the optics. I do have to give him the benefit of the doubt. I don't know what he knows about certain people. I have to be, at least, unless I know something specific, like he knows, let's just assume the worst about Father James Martin, or whatever. We don't have to do that with some politicians that he meets with. Let's say, I have to assume that he doesn't know everything about them. And I know people are going to say, "Oh, that's stupid. How could he not know?" Well, maybe he doesn't know, and maybe he does. I don't know. So, I mean, just because he meets with someone at the end of the day, it does really look bad, and he probably shouldn't do it, and there probably should be rebukes, and maybe there are rebukes that we don't know about that happen privately in conversations. We see problematic people meeting with the Pope and smiling and shaking hands. Perhaps there is some sort of private rebuke that he's giving to them. I don't know. There's a lot that we don't know in terms of the way he governs, and I think there's a lot of criticism that we could give him in that regard. And then there's what he says. Well, what venue is he speaking? Is he speaking off the cuff on an airplane interview, or is he actually releasing like a magisterial document? Because those are two starkly different things, and people unfortunately treat them the same. I think, where I would give Pope Francis, and obviously I think he's the Holy Father. I mean, there's a lot of people that doubt, well, maybe he's not the Holy Father because his election is invalid and all that stuff. No, I mean, I firmly believe that he is the Pope. And I used to do the same thing with Benedict and John Paul II, although I think they gave us less ammunition, or they gave the rad trads less ammunition to kind of attack and critique. But there were things.
Kissing the Quran was sort of edgy.
Yeah, exactly. Not a good move. I will never support that. I'm sorry. St. John Paul II, I love you.
On Judgment Day, we're going to find out what was going on. Like, what would happen? You're going to find out.
Honestly, but even early on in my Christian journey, there was a point where I thought I would have thought that was cool, because I'm like, I mean, there was a point even early on in my walk with Christ where I was like, syncretism. It didn't really, that wasn't like on my radar. So I was like, yeah, anyone who believes in God is awesome, And so it was like, I was just trying to get people to believe in God. So I'm like, oh, these people have scriptures, and there's parts of our books that are in the Quran, and he's just kissing those parts. So I would I would chalk it up. But the more I thought about it, I'm like, yeah, that's just not a good. I mean, saints don't always have to do everything accurately and perfectly. And it's not like he said, like, this is the holiest book on par with the Bible or something like that. He kissed the Quran. It wasn't a good move. Yeah. We can critique our saints in that way. I love John Paul II, very influenced by him. And, I get his intercession occasionally, not as much as I should, but yeah, so it's okay. So the actions, and then kind of what they say too, is important. I don't think Pope Francis is very good at speaking off the cuff. He's very imprecise. I mean, look at how old he's. What is he? 86 or something, maybe 87 shortly. He's of that generation that came after the council, so he didn't. As far as I know, there was some wonky theology floating around at his times. Obviously, he's a Jesuit. We all know what happened to the Jesuit order. So he has a lot of bad upbringing influences that kind of, I think, color the way that he speaks. And it's very, I mean, he does try to be as pastoral as possible. We'll give him credit for that, but sometimes that can lend itself to like pretty imprecise language, especially when he's speaking off the cuff, like on an airplane interview, and say some things that are kind of confusing there. Obviously those aren't magisterial. And then even when he's talking about specifically something that's scientific or climate related or health related, like with the jab and all that. Oh yeah, I mean, Catholics are free. I mean, we owe a certain amount of respect. Okay, well, hear him out. What does he have to say about it? He thinks that, the world's going to burn down, in the next 10 years or whatever. We're free to disagree with him on that, because it's not faith or morals. As long as we're saying, okay, yeah, we'll be good stewards to the environment. Yeah. We're fine with that. But he's being really misled on the climate stuff. He's being really misled on the jab issue, the medical issue. But none of that stuff has creeped its way into like faith and morals. It's gotten pretty close in some documents, but there's been nothing binding on us in terms of a change in faith and morals on it. And he can't really do that, because the science and medicine are outside of faith and morals to a certain extent, unless it's like bioethics. So yeah, I would disagree with him on that. But then the things that he says that are specifically that have to do with faith and morals, that are in magisterial documents, like motu proprios or encyclicals and things like that, those are things that we have to take very, very seriously, and give him, we talk about giving the Pope the benefit of the doubt and not rashly judging him, as it says in the Catechism. That's where we really have to be careful with that, because people take like, oh, I disagree with him about climate and jab stuff and politics or whatever, and then they transfer that lens to how they're looking at papal magisterial documents, and they just read it with this lens of suspicion, like, where is the modernism, where is the liberal theology in here? And they see something that could be interpreted that way. It's always a stretch to interpret it that way. Because I've like you said with Father James Martin, a lot of these things I just believed because I heard some rad trad say it. I didn't actually go back and read the encyclical because I was lazy. And I'm like, oh, he really said that? Oh, that doesn't seem right. But then I read the document, sometimes even years later. I'm like, oh no, it's easy to interpret this with, what was in line with tradition, and so I'm like, that's not even a hard thing to do with most of these instances. It's not like I'm having that be the stretch. No, the stretch is actually interpreting it in a liberal way. That's what I think.
There was a case when when Bergoglio, as they love to call him, when
Yeah.
Bergoglio was Bergoglio in Argentina. He was a bishop there, or archbishop, or whatever he was. And there was, there's a big scandal because they're saying he had defended a pedophile and all these sorts of things, pedophile priest. What was his name? Father... hold on, just let me find out what the name of this guy was. But anyway, I talked to the lawyer that wrote the controversial opinion piece, and he said, "Look, I don't have a dog in the fight because I'm not a practicing Catholic, but no, the accusations against the Holy Father are unfounded, and these are the reasons why." Grassi, that was his name, Father Grassi. So I don't know if you've heard about that case, but
oh yeah, I've heard a lot about it. Yeah, working in
I talked to the guy who wrote the 5-volume opinion, and it's like a complete joke. It was taken out of context from a portion of his opinion piece that was already beyond the pale of suspicion that these particular accusers were found to be liars. They were non-credible. They were thrown out already when he wrote his opinion piece, and that's the part that they're citing to smear Bergoglio. So there's a lot of shenanigans. There's a lot of dirty tricks, and I find it disgusting. I wanted to ask you, did you watch The Pope Answers? It's a documentary that was on Hulu, I think, about where he's sound with some young people. Did you have a chance to watch that?
I did. I think I don't know. I didn't see the whole thing, but I saw some of the pertinent clips on it. Yeah, for sure.
Shocking, a little bit shocking. I mean, it's just a fact that he was very, very because you talk about chastising, rebuking the sinner and these sorts of things. He didn't do that on camera, that's for sure. Some of these women were just selling their bodies online or whatever, and he was, I don't want to say he was smiling on it. I mean, but he did stand up for against abortion. That was pretty clear, and he did stand up, to a certain extent, for love in the family and sexual morality, but not as much as I would have. And I'm very I'm very gentle with my non-Catholic guests on my podcast. If they have wacky, weird ideas, I just roll with it. And I saw him rolling with these young kids with their crazy, sinful lifestyles. Most of them. So I like to think that God appointed him, the Holy Spirit is at work in him to a certain extent, and he has a lot of charisms, and there must be a good reason why he's so gentle and so accommodating. But what was your take?
Yeah, I forget, and that's because it's been a few months since that has come out. I would agree with you in that, yeah, it wasn't as strong of a rebuke as I would have liked to see. But again, I mean, I know what that's like, being a person who's worked with young people for many years, and we can always sort of look as, sort of an armchair observer. And so I would have said this, I would have said that, and I would have led this young person in this direction and been very firm on this truth. And it's, he's very, well, maybe should have done that in those certain things. But I mean, again, he's an older gentleman. Maybe he was caught off guard, and he always does err on the side of perhaps being overly pastoral, and as to where that leads into, well, that's not really being pastoral if you're not rebuking someone for their sin, type of thing. And those sort of errors or potential errors can take place in the context of an impromptu question to the Pope from a young person. Because I mean, I will tell you, young people ask the strangest off the wall things. I mean, I would never Oh, maybe I would. It would be quite entertaining. But I would probably like want to go back and edit some things that I said. Would I ever talk to a group of young people on camera? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe perhaps that wasn't a smart move because I would, when I was in the classroom, no one was watching me. I was just with 30 kids in a classroom. I wasn't being taped or anything, but I would have, discussions like open Q&A, ask me anything about the faith. And you never knew what you were going to get. I mean, a lot of it had to do with sexual issues. I mean, because I taught in an all boys school. Teenage boys were obsessed with that stuff. They always will be. And but we did. You had to slog through a lot of silliness and a lot of misunderstanding. But if you really spent enough time with them, you could sort of lead them in the right direction. So that's one of my critiques of like the Hulu documentary format is because they only showed whatever it was, however long the conversation was in that particular instance. Um, but if you really got to see the full thing,
Mm.
and maybe he would have led him down a different path. I mean, yeah, it's hard to know, where to err or how to do that sort of pastoral interaction. Yeah, because if he was just giving a theological treatise on Catholic sexual morality, I think it would be different. As to where he's just telling you like it is, what the church has always taught, what natural law teaches. But then when you're actually trying to apply that to a particular person in a particular situation in front of a person face to face, who's, I think one of the girls on there like was doing like softcore porn or something like
Yeah,
that. She was
yeah.
selling herself, and it's like, well, yeah, I want to say, honey, stop doing that type of thing. But it's like, well, you kind of got to ease into that because these people, I mean, their minds, there's a lot of baggage that you have to leap over pastorally. So, and he might, yeah. And again, you can always critique him for not being strong enough in that particular instance.
It was funny. I don't know if you noticed there was one sort of conservative Catholic girl there, and she was speaking out very strongly against abortion because most of them there just thought it was, cool, women's right to choose whatever. But this one young lady, I think her name was Maria, actually, she spoke very strongly and passionately, and she had more of a conservative, traditional family, Catholic family life, very active in the church and these sorts of things. And Pope Francis, I noticed that he was more harsh on her. Like, I mean, he was harsh in a good way. It was a nice chastisement that he gave her, but it was basically like, well, you're young, you're on fire, but Satan wants to sift you. Like, that's basically what he said to her. He's like, Satan wants to sift you, and you're young. There's a long road ahead of you, and it's not going to be easy. That's what he said to her. So that was like the sternest and most dramatic, doom and gloom talk that he gave to anyone. And it was the conservative, So that I found that interesting. And maybe there's a method to his madness. Maybe there's a reason why God has given us this Pope at this time. Maybe there's a good reason. Maybe that this is what maybe the real danger is not sexual license today. Maybe the real danger is attacking and undermining the authority of Jesus Christ and his vicar and his church.
It very well could be. And yeah, I mean, I could see the argument that would say that the Pope potentially made a prudential pastoral error there in not just affirming that young lady and being pro-life or whatever. Sometimes I think he errs on the side of assuming that the person is being prideful in upholding church teaching. Because I think he's rebuked people for it's a very strange thing at the outset when the Pope appears to be rebuking someone who is evangelizing and has brought people into the faith. I think there was an incident, where a woman brought 2 converts and says, look what I did, Holy Father. There's these 2 Christians now. And I don't think there's video of that. I think there's just like a transcript maybe of it. But it seems like the Pope intuited, rightly or wrongly, that woman was sort of just showing off like that she has 2 converts and she's got 2 checks, she checked 2 boxes and was just doing it sort of out of a sense of pride, and maybe that's what he sensed there. I hope that's my benefit of the doubt reading on that. I mean, you would want to lead with something like this though, like, oh, I'm glad that these 2 people are Christian now, but hey, I'm sensing that you might be a little prideful with this. Like, that's the route that I would have taken.
Be careful. Yeah. Yeah, it's hilarious. Another thing that comes to mind is, I think it was Saint Monica, Saint Augustine's mother. I think it was she who said that, rather than having a serious talk with the sinner about God, She had chose rather to have a serious talk with God about that particular sinner. So it seems to me that's it's like it seems like that's Pope Francis's way, and I think that he care. I think that he does care. I think that he is Catholic, and I think that his emphasis on the dignity of the sinner is so radical that a lot of people just don't get it. They don't understand it. And so I'm open to the possibility. I'm not telling you this is reality. I'm just saying I hope it is. I hope that's reality. He's just very Christ-like, and that he's doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes. Now, this will bring to mind, the Q-tards with Trump and his 5D chess with losing the election on purpose and these sorts of things. Okay, yeah, I'm guilty as charged. Like, I'm trying to do whatever dimension of chess is required to make Pope Francis the good guy, okay? Guilty as charged, okay? But I believe in a mighty God who is working behind the scenes. He is, right? We're going to find out on Judgment Day. And I'm not going to go to hell because of Pope Francis. I'm not. Even if tomorrow, and this is what I say to my rad trad friends, even if tomorrow sodomy is obligatory in the church and we have to worship the Pachamama on every altar and whatever, that doesn't shake my faith. It doesn't shake my faith. It doesn't.
Yeah. And you're never going to be chastised. Well, you might be chastised by the rad trads, but you're never going to be chastised by God for doing your best to be, to have a filial obedience to the Holy Father and try to give, even if it seems like a stretch for many people to do this, even giving the Holy Father and whatever he says and whatever he does the best interpretation possible. God's not going to fault you for that, because it's like giving your own dad the benefit of the doubt when it comes to that stuff. You always want to err on the side of obedience unless you're really sure that the thing you're being asked to do is against the faith or sinful or whatever like that. But if it's just, you want to do your best to err on that side. And two, I mean, we've gotten some sinful popes throughout history. But the interesting thing is that they never lost the papal office. They were never declared to have lost the papal office. Even the popes that were, I think, accused of heresy, that's a debate as to whether or not they were rightly or wrongly accused of heresy. There's been a couple throughout history that have been accused of heresy. They were never they never went back and declared that those popes weren't the pope or anything like that. I think that, if I go back to Christ's words in the gospel about the office of Peter and each individual who fulfills that office. Christ prayed that, Peter's faith will never fail. Once he's converted, after, this is after he denied our Lord, once he came back, Peter and all of his successors, their faith will never fail. Even the sinful popes, they did sinful things, but none of them ever became atheists, as far as I know. I know people who claim Pope Francis has lost the faith. He's a modernist. He doesn't really believe in the faith. Think about what that does, though. I mean, doesn't that go against Christ's words? His faith will never fail. I mean, if the church is built upon the rock of St. Peter and the office of the papacy and whatever pope happens to occupy the office at that time, if that rock loses the faith, that's the foundation of the church. Would God ever? I don't think God would ever allow that to happen. Yeah, we might get some sinful popes, but we get some popes who make some bad prudential judgments and popes who might govern, slightly different than what we would expect or should. But that's the extent of it. We're never going to get a pope that loses the faith. We're never going to get a pope that teaches something so erroneous that it's a danger to our faith, that if we were to believe it, it would violate the law of non-contradiction or something like that. I don't think our Lord would ever let that happen to the church, honestly.
Yeah. Well, the Pope is the principle of unity in the church. I asked one of my guests, who's a sedevacantist, what's your principle of unity? And he said, well, we don't have one.
Wow, I can't believe that.
Yeah. Well, even Michael Matt said that he has unity. He called it unity in opposition. He said we have the unity in opposition to the Pope. So it's like, that's not the kind of unity we want.
That makes your whole faith life like a revolution. Well, what happens when you get the unity? Let's say you get everything you want. You get the Latin Mass back. You get pious, a good pope that you like, everyone likes. Like, what happens when you get the? You're going to have nothing to rail against then. Your whole shtick of being, attacking, the priests and the bishops and the Pope, like that's all going to go away, and you're just going to be left like wanting to be angry at something.
It's crazy. I hope you come back. It's been amazing. I've abused your generosity here. We've done an hour and 40 minutes, but it's just so easy talking with you. And I hope you'll send along a cordial invitation to your friend David. Is it Dave or David?
Either one. David Gordon.
Are you good friends now after having worked together?
Oh yeah, we talk on a daily basis, and we do, like I said, we do a weekly show together, and we're coworkers at Church Militant. So yeah, David, for better or worse, Dave and I are tied at the hip.
You're like brothers. You got the sibling rivalry, but you're probably, I don't know him at all, but I mean, it seems like you're very affable and gentle and kind and humble. Is he a little bit more extroverted and edgy, or no?
Yeah, he's going to have, we both got some different, we mostly agree on 99% of things. Yeah, my approach might be a little more kind and gentle, but no,
Soft.
Dave's a very, very good man. Yeah, he might have some different takes on some things, and, be a little more forceful in terms of his language or something like that. But yeah, it's just, there's two different perspectives of, I think, the same thing.
That's cool. Well,
yeah, he'd be happy to come on. I know that.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. It's been a real joy meeting you, and I hope you're going to pray for me and mine. I always ask my guests to pray for me and mine. And I enroll each and every one of my guests in a perpetual mass, so you and your family are going to get the benefits of that. Just a little extra grace for you. You're getting lots of grace already, but just a little extra.
Okay. That's awesome. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, so thank you so much. And let's keep in touch. And in 2024, hopefully you'll come back. We'll do part 2. We'll chat about whatever's of interest to you, okay?
I'd love that, David. Thank you so much for having me on. God bless you. God bless your audience. And yeah, I look forward to being back.
I'll send you the link, and if you want, you can share it. No pressure.
But sure.
God bless you, my brother.
Thanks, David. Have a good one.
We'll talk soon. Love you. Talk soon. Bye-bye.